My name is Michael Goldberg, and I am a professor teaching entrepreneurship at the Weatherhead School of Management, and also wear another hat where I am the executive director of our new Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship on campus, located normally at ThinkBox, but today at my house, as all things are remote these days. We are thrilled to have a great panel today as we celebrate the Weatherhead 100 competition, and we have two former winners, Andy and Chris, joining us today, and Eric Keene, who's an awesome alum and has been a great mentor and leader on campus to so many folks. And the way we'll do today's session, we've been fortunate enough over the last year. I was like unfortunate because so many of our things are remote, but we've had really great students that have volunteered to moderate a lot of our discussions that we've done both at Weatherhead and out of the Veale Institute. So I asked Marissa Muth, who is about to be a double alum. Marissa graduated from Case with her undergraduate degree in the spring and is just finishing up her master's in accountancy and is joining us from Steelerland in Pittsburgh at her house. So Marissa's gonna run the show today. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So please, if you're on Zoom, you can either put a question in the chat for our panelists, raise your Zoom hand, raise your real hand, and we want to make sure that we will hear from as many of you as possible. And if you're watching on LinkedIn Live, just put your question in the comment, and then Doug DiGirolamo and I will be sort of jumping back and forth between LinkedIn, and we'll make sure that Marissa sees the question. So Andy, Chris, and Eric, thank you again for joining us today. And Marissa, over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Goldberg, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to moderate this session today. And just welcome everyone, and thank you for attending our session. So as Professor Goldberg mentioned, my name is Marissa Muth. I'm a very soon to be graduate of Case for the Masters of Accountancy. And I'm very excited to moderate the session today with our three panelists. We have Chris Adams, CEO of Park Place Technology, Andy Fauver, VP of Transaction Advisory at Insight to Profit, and Eric Keene, President of Keene Advisory Group. And today's discussion is going to focus on the impact that the global pandemic has had on businesses and ways in which companies have reacted in order to rise to the challenge. And as Professor Goldberg mentioned, for everyone on Zoom, just please start or continue to put questions in the chat for our panelists. And throughout the session today, I will definitely call on you to introduce yourselves and ask your questions. So before we begin with discussion regarding the pandemic, I want to give each of our panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves. So if you could provide a brief description of your career path and the background of your company. Chris, do you want to start?
Sure. So I guess career path, I am a graduate of Case. Got an MBA in entrepreneurship. You know, back then it was Richard Osborne, and I think that's probably dating me because it's been a while, I think, since it's been his program. But so I did get an MBA at Case. I've been working for Park Place for 15 years. I started CFO and then worked my way up to COO, president, and now CEO. So it's been a good run. You know, as a company, we provide post-warranty data center maintenance, which means we fix servers and storage equipment in big data centers all over the world. Anything else? Is that good enough for you?
No, that's perfect. Andy, do you want to go and introduce yourself?
Sure. Andy Falver here. I was a 2000 Weatherhead graduate. I think I was the last class in the old building, so I didn't get the benefits of the nice new building and campus. But I started my career with Ernst & Young long ago, now EY, and then got more of the bug to be in small companies. I joined a company after E&Y called the Fredonia Group and started their consulting practice. And then about 5 years ago, I joined a very interesting company called Insight to Profit. We help our clients maximize their profitability through pricing, technology, and implementation of pricing strategies. So we serve predominantly middle market businesses. We're based here in Cleveland, Ohio. We've got about 160 employees overall, about 120 in Cleveland. When I joined 4.5 years ago, there were 52 employees. Now we've got about 160. So I think it's a very interesting story anywhere, but especially in Cleveland, and look forward to the panel.
Great, thanks. Eric?
Sure. Eric Keene, Weatherhead alum from the class of '94, if that dates me even more so than the others. So Enterprise Hall, Scott Cowan, the whole shebang there. Out of Weatherhead, I actually worked for McKinsey here in the Cleveland office for a few years, and then was recruited by Russell Reynolds to actually participate and work in executive search as compared to being a candidate on one of their searches. And that's where my career pivoted. And after working at Russell Reynolds, founded my own firm, Keene Advisory Group, about 15 plus years ago. We office in Chicago and in Cleveland. I'm actually in Cleveland today. A lot of snow. I'd forgotten how much snow. We work with a variety of clients nationally in multiple industry verticals. Focus a lot on general management, commercial roles, and some shared service functional positions as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you guys for all sharing. So let's move on to the main topic, the pandemic. Can each of you discuss how the pandemic impacted your business this past year and what challenges you've had to overcome? Andy, do you want to start this time?
Sure. I think that from our perspective, the pandemic has obviously been the story of the year, and how I've characterized it is, I think thus far there's really been 3 trimesters of this, really from mid-March on to maybe mid-May was really, holy cow, what's going on? How bad is this going to be? With the first part really being like, September 12th, 2001, where every day you wondered what was going to happen. And like my fellow panelists were old enough to remember that. A lot of people in our company have not been through anything like that. I think the average age in our company is about between 26 and 28. So they really haven't seen downturns in the economy or this type of severe headwind. So in the first 2 months, it was both taking care of our clients who were really across the board, some that were trying to figure out how they could manage cash, some who actually had a little bit of unforeseen tailwind, and then others who wanted to continue partnering but under different terms, whether that was payment terms or the nature of the work we were doing with them. So that first 2 months was really quite turbulent for our clients and for us. And then I would say that there was a bit of stabilization in the summer time frame. And then where we really kind of bottomed out and people started getting their breath and said this was going to be okay. It's just how long is it going to be? And then I would say in the August time frame, we really started to ramp up and get back to pre-COVID levels in terms of our business and looking at growth again. Our business is heavily tied, as I mentioned, to middle market companies, and about 80+% of our clients are private equity sponsored. So as such, the M&A activity is a key indicator of what is going to happen in our business. And as you may or may not know, M&A activity really stopped in mid-March and has subsequently picked up in quite a meaningful fashion. So I would say those are really the pieces of the macro part of our business. And then, I'll let others chime in, but then there was really the part of how you do business. That early on, it was fairly natural for us to pivot to a remote environment. We travel a fair amount for business, so we're used to working remotely out of hotel rooms, at Starbucks, at our clients. So being remote was not unusual, but being remote every day and living life in 30-minute increments really is quite different that we learned, like others have. And that, offices like this are good for a period of time, but then over time, you just aren't wired like you need to in terms of comfort. And we have a lot of, as I mentioned, younger people who are in apartments with roommates. And so there's just a lot of things that you couldn't have foreseen, a longer term pandemic and remote work looking like, and just how to take care of each other, make sure that you do some calls when you're walking because you're sitting all the time. And there's just so many layers of this that I want to let other people jump in, but we're we're still unpacking it right now. In fact, just before this, we were doing a team yoga session to try and get people engaged and moving around and teaching them tools for how to handle, work at home. Granted, we're 8 months into it, but we're still learning every day. So I'll pause there and let Eric and Chris jump in, because I think there's just so much to this, and likely they can offer different perspectives.
Sure, I'll pick it up from there, and I think the categorization that you had, Andy, was effective, and I think a lot of folks felt the different stages as well. Perhaps with some gray area around, what stage are we really in right now? We continue to find out or understand what we don't understand about how this is going to play out. I'll pick up on one of your points, Andy. As an executive recruiter, we had already embraced a lot of remote interviewing techniques. So, to get on a video conference with a potential candidate was not uncommon in our industry. What has happened via the pandemic is, I think the culture has caught up to the technology, and now we're wrestling with that and how that's ultimately. And when I say the culture is caught up to the technology, again, I think the technology, and my tech folks, please check me on this, but the technology has been here for a while, widely available, no hard line, dedicated hardware necessary to interact this way. But culturally, we were not there collectively as a business culture. And the pandemic has really forced us into this arena where this is becoming normal to interact in this way in 30-minute increments, and kind of jokingly, I look at our perspective as executive recruiters, as evaluators of talent, as interviewers. And a year and a half ago, if I was conducting a video conference and the door opens in the back and the 6-year-old comes running through the room, or Mr. Nibbles jumps on your keyboard and starts playing around in the middle of a call, I'm steady redlining the resume saying unprofessional, not focused. And nowadays, because of the environment in which we work, people are far more forgiving. The culture around this is, let's keep it moving. Life has a way of happening, sometimes in the background, sometimes concurrent to your calls. And, you've kind of put away the judgment and focused on what's really important about the conversations and the meetings that you're in.
Okay, Eric, I think that's my cue. I'm third in line here. So, so we're a global service organization. We've got roughly 2,300 employees. We have customer equipment in 150 countries. So, this was not just a U.S. challenge for us, but a global challenge, and a good learning experience for me, because you learn a lot running a global company about culture too, which is interesting. But if I step back, our company, we've been through a lot of rounds of private equity, and always through that, they're always excited about the fact that we're perceived as what they would refer to as recession resistant, meaning the equipment we support runs whether there's a recession or not. It doesn't know, right? You still have to run your data centers. So that's a good thing for us, but it doesn't change the fact that the economy is struggling. So, I wouldn't say we thrive in a bad economy, but we will grow still this year. It won't be growth like we've had in prior years, but I know there are a lot of companies hurting. So that was a good thing for us. But it still, for us, was global crisis management. And we do have a crisis management group, and they were meeting the first month every day, and then it went to every week, et cetera. We had to react globally because the way this pandemic was being managed, we had field engineers, and they go out to customer sites. And in the US, there were different rules in different states, and we also had to make sure they were protected. But also globally, India, for example, we actually worried about the safety of our employees, because the authorities there was violence. We had to worry about an engineer getting injured going to work, to fix something by the authorities, because they did things like this. So I mentioned earlier, it was a cultural learning experience and a good one for me. But we were able to muscle through it like everybody else. The world keeps turning. So once we got through the crisis management, then we kind of looked inward at our business and how does this affect us? I've always told this to people, I didn't get into this to eliminate jobs. Having to lay people off terrified me. You get in business to create jobs. That's the goal. And for a while there, I was worried about that. we were able to get through it without, that having happened to us. And that's fortunate because that's not the same as a lot of other industries and businesses. So that's a good thing. Then it's worrying about the safety of our employees. So I mentioned we have people that have to go out and see customers. Well, now I'm panicking that I can't get enough N95 masks to protect them, and other PPP equipment to keep our people safe, and you got to sit there and make a decision. Well, do you stay in business and put people at risk? Like everybody in March was terrified. And we had to get through all that. We did. And we haven't fortunately had anything serious happen to an employee. So then you start looking at, okay, now we got all that figured out. We got to run a business. We still got to sell. We still got to deliver services. So we started thinking through, how does this affect the growth of the business and what things should we be doing? And ultimately, how do you message appropriately in this environment? Because it's a little different than a typical environment. You don't want to come across as crass or inappropriate when you're trying to sell your services to companies that may be struggling, right? Or they still need to run their data centers, but they might be going out of business. How do you deal with that? So an example, we have airlines, we have hotels. We had to make a lot of accommodations for them payment-wise. And I think those things long-term will help us because they'll remember what we did for them in this economy, and they'll come back and want to be a longer-term customer. So I think that's all, good. And I can't speak for how others handled that because we were fortunate enough the business was doing well. So we could manage that cash flow issue, but not everybody can do that. So not everybody has that luxury to say, you don't have to pay us for 6 months. There are bills. They do need to get paid. So for us, we were fortunate. I don't know that everybody has that situation. And then I think the last thing is we're a very acquisitive company. Andy mentioned this, M&A. We did have a deal in the pipeline when this hit. And we did close that deal in May. That was a small one. But we also had a very large deal in the pipe. We're roughly a $250 million company. We had a competitor that was about the same size in maintenance, had another business. We were in the process of working through a deal to acquire them when this happened. That was a different story because you couldn't get financing in March. We needed, a lot of financing to get the deal done. Again, the world kind of normalized. People figured out how to live in Corona, and we ended up buying our biggest competitor here last month and doubled the size of the company. So, all in all, my learning experience through all this is people adapt. I think ultimately, living in Ohio, for example, no one left the house for 2 months. Then they started allowing you out with masks on and limited access to restaurants and spacing out, et cetera. Well, business is the same way. We figured out how to do business and keep people's jobs while we're keeping them safe. And I think that's the key. You got to continue to do that because a lot of people are hurting out there. And I don't know if there's a trade-off. I've told people this. It was interesting, and I know we had probably a lot of millennials on. There's a dichotomy in how they approach this. Like our people in their 50s was like, just go to work and deal with it. They're not complaining, even though they're the highest at risk employees I have. The millennials were on me like, hey, I don't really want to go into the office. It seems dangerous to me. And we had to, manage through all that, which we did. But the reason we wanted them there because they're our salespeople, and we need to sell to keep the business going. If our engineers are taking risks, then I didn't think it was appropriate for other people to be safe at home if the numbers are off. I don't want to have to lay people off. That was the key. So, we had to manage through all that. That wasn't a fun thing to do as a business. It still isn't. I think we're home for the holidays now, but we're coming back in January. So we'll see if I'm still popular with the employees or not. But culture also matters, and everybody working remote, you lose culture. Culture is big at our company. We're a tech company. We're try to be trendy and do things and keep people working together. And that's all gone away with this. So, that's another concern I have that we'll have to manage through, I think, in the next 6 months. Good news, I think, with vaccines coming, they'll probably be able to get people back in the office by next summer, I think. So that's kind of our experience at Park Place.
Great. Thank you guys, all of you, for sharing so much. I did notice a hand got raised. Heidi, do you want to ask a question? You're on mute.
Sorry. I was going to wait. Actually, it's a little bit of a lighter topic, but I guess I can ask it now if it's appropriate. As far as culture, the holidays, since we're in the holiday season, how are you letting your employees know that you care? Are you doing holiday parties, or how are you handling that this year?
And Heidi, would you mind introducing yourself just so we know?
I'm sorry. Yes, I'm Heidi Carrion. I'm actually currently with Sure Tape Technologies, known locally as the Duct Tape Company. I'm in Avon, Ohio, and I am a 2006 grad from Weatherhead.
Great. Thanks, Heidi.
No problem.
Yeah, I think that's a good question on the culture. We probably maybe like the other folks on the line, we do an employee NPS score on a quarterly basis, just an ENPS. And we've been fortunate that it's stayed steady through this. And I've heard, as you look at, other organizations and even some of the sports teams, those who've done best in this are those with strong cultures, not surprisingly. And like I think Eric and Chris both described, Insight to Profit, I think has a very strong culture. And that's one of the things that we really didn't predict in advance, where it takes just a lot of energy to stay engaged with folks that you normally would have been traveling with, that you would have seen, and now you don't. So that you have to make that time to, early on it was easy with quarantine challenges, happy hours, everyone was really excited. Then it got really tiring, honestly. It was just one more thing you had to do. It's 6 o'clock on a Tuesday is have drinks with people, where you were working all the time. And so I think that we've been more thoughtful now to try and layer those throughout the day with coffee check-ins and that kind of thing. In terms of holiday, you're trying to be very mindful both with groups within the company, with the company at large, and even with our clients in terms of how we recognize them, in terms of gifts and gratitude. And I think have taken a thoughtful approach, but it's different because we're not doing in-person events largely at this stage. So we are doing more things where we're having lunches, dinners, cooking events together. Probably all the different clever things you've heard about throughout. I mentioned the yoga session we just did this morning, to make sure that people are recognized, as well as creating forums for people to get together, because it's not just the pandemic. There's been a lot of other things that have gone on this year as well, whether it's related to the election or different types of diversity, equity, and inclusion topics that are key on people's minds. There's just a lot going on, and you have to spend a lot of time to make sure that there's forums for those things. So I think the long-winded way is, we think we're doing the right things in creating those environments and connections, but certainly it's something that takes time and thoughtfulness to make sure that you're hitting the mark.
Kind of just going off on that a little bit, you guys were all mentioning culture, and kind of just, another major focus besides the pandemic of this year was the social justice movement. And so, Andy, you were kind of hinting in this, and has that prompted any of you to take a fresh look at how your organization is supporting diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, certainly, but if anyone else wants to jump in, I don't want to take all the time. We have, I would say that it was something that we did before this, but I would say that it was a secondary or just part of what we would say was the fabric, but we were not as direct, and we've become much more direct in terms of training for how to do interviews, with being more direct with what our objectives are and how we measure our social impact. That historically it's been very philanthropic, but I don't think it's been probably more single-threaded, whereas now we have done more grassroots as well as top-down diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives within the company. But I would say that we are still in the very early part of that journey.
We also have a history of focusing on these things. Example would be being in tech. There's a disparity between men and women in a lot of these jobs, and for years, we were trying to get equity there and struggling. So what we ended up doing was creating a STEM program for women only, and it starts at a very young age. If you do research on this, you got to get people young in all topics. Honestly, I'm on a board of a local charter system called Breakthrough Schools. It's the same thing. You get these kids at a very young age, and you talk about college from kindergarten on up. So I want to do the same thing because I love tech, and I got 2 daughters. I can't talk them into it. It makes me crazy. They roll their eyes at me. So, we started with just talking to kids at a young age, and then all the way on up through college. We actually sponsor foreign exchange students from Ireland to come over twice a year, although two students a year. This year we had, unfortunately, we couldn't do it. But it was, kind of like Andy said, it was in different areas of the business. You would react to business conditions. Through this whole journey the country's been on this summer, a lot of employees wanted more organization around it, and they started a group, employee resource group called Dimensions. And so when they wanted to do this, my conversation was, I'll do it, but it's not for everybody's in a room and just talking about their feelings. I run a company and I want it to impact the business. So what I want is a group that helps me find diverse candidates to do a better job at that. Because, in areas we struggle, and all the way on up, Eric runs a recruiting firm. I've recruited for some senior executive positions. And every time I sit down, I say, I'm not going to close out my process till I get the right diversity in the candidate flow. We're paying you a ton of money to do this, so do it right. And I always struggle with it still, and it's aggravating. I would say as a tech company, we've done fairly well at this, but it's not good enough. So I ask the employees now, help us with this, right? So this group, that's part of their job, finding diverse candidates. Then on interviewing, Andy mentioned this, but unconscious bias is always an issue when you interview. It permeates everything. Every individual, everybody on this call has unconscious bias. And teaching people to recognize it when you're talking to a candidate makes us better, because you want the best candidates always. That's not the package. It's usually what's in the package. You gotta look for that. And then how employees' experience goes at the company. I always tell people, if the best person's afraid to talk because of how their look or their orientation in any way, we fail, because that doesn't make us better as a company. It doesn't protect all of our jobs. The competitors will catch you. And diversity is a very good thing, because it's diversity of thought and experience for capitalism. You want to have, a wide range of perspectives when you're marketing to people, or else you won't do a good job of that. So it's very important, in my opinion, for a business. And for getting the social justice, if you want to be a good business, you need to have this. You look around at a meeting, everybody looks like you in the meeting, you're not going to come out with the best solution, in my opinion. So for us, it's, for me personally, it's always been important. Having said that, you're not going to see me out there lecturing everybody in the world. My job is to run a company well and to make sure that we treat people with dignity and respect. So that's kind of where I focus. Other people have their opinions, but I'm not going to, I kind of stay out of the public piece of it. I want to run a good company. I want people to be proud to work for us. So that's kind of what we've done. And it was pretty cool that they came up with the name Dimensions. I like that. I thought it was a really good name for this resource group. But it's going well. I would like to still see more diverse candidates. We've got a couple executive openings, and, I'm not seeing what I like, even with the group, even with the recruiting firms, even with the pressure in the business. And I'll honestly hate admitting this, but part of it is it's harder to get people to move to Cleveland. I'm struggling there. If I didn't do that, we would maybe have better success here. But someone asked about culture. All of our employees are here. So culture is important to me, that people are here. I just feel, maybe I'm old school, but when everybody's in a room working together, I might have to change that to solve this problem. But that's kind of what we've done on the topic. Yeah, one other thing too to add is this is interesting, because we're global. America, we're so consumed with ourselves, we don't kind of look at the rest of the world. But this problem is all over the world in different contexts. So as an example, we have employees in Malaysia, and there's a whole caste system, Malaysia and Singapore, where people treat people differently. Indians, Chinese, indigenous Malaysian people, there's like a pecking order, and they treat people, it feels much worse to me there, because it's overt and they treat people differently. So we have to address it, not just in the US. We have got these groups all over the world, and they're trying to look in their own communities to do a better job of this, because it can be a universal challenge.
Well, Chris, look, there's nothing wrong with being old school and wanting people to leverage and find power and energy around having everyone in the same place and being able to work off of that. These are ongoing challenges, and I think you have to remind yourself that it is a journey. There's at no point does any organization or company stop that process and say, we've won, we've figured it out? It's not that kind of endeavor. It is part of doing business. We have, at my firm, and you talk about the culture components of this, our scale is fundamentally different than Andy and Chris's. So there's a level of intimacy in terms of my work with my employees, who are, again, a more limited number. But we operate in a both and type of environment, and have done so prior to the elevation of the social justice discussion of the past year. And I think, Andy, you touched upon, it's such a multivariate analysis, right? Between COVID, between the election, between the social justice issues, there's just so many things to unpack right now. And, I think staying true to, where you feel you are as an organization, as a culture is very important in terms of being able to maintain and continue on. But at the end of the day, we are business people running businesses. That doesn't preclude us from these activities, but it does create a lens in terms of how we view the world. But I've always encouraged and advocated a both and perspective on that. And I learned that from actually Dr. Marilyn Mobley at Case. She was the first person to really articulate that to me in a way that resonated, and we flagrantly borrowed that and continue to do so in conversations on this topic.
All right. Thank you guys all for sharing. This is so important. I think Emily has a question.
Okay.
Hi, I was thinking of a question. I didn't mean to raise my hand if that's something I did.
We raised it for you.
I guess one thing that's very interesting, considering that you're all Case alum, is what do you think the focus of your MBA programs were, and what was the most impactful takeaway that you guys got from your Case Western experience?
Well, I guess I could go. I think, it depends what you want your career to be. When people ask these questions to me, I always kind of ask, well, what is your last job? What do you aspire to be at the apex of your career? And then I think you can work backwards, on the takeaways. I mean, for me, I kind of knew where I wanted to go in a career, and I was competitive. So it was, education is good, but education's good at Cleveland State, at Baldwin Wallace, John Carroll. But Case has a pedigree to it that's unique in Cleveland. It does stand out on a resume, in my opinion. And I think that helped me personally earlier in my career when there was less on a resume to say, look at this candidate versus another person. When you're, particularly if you're willing to go and fund your own MBA, because I did it. I just paid it off a few years ago as a late middle-aged man. It's not cheap. I think it says something to employers when you kind of go to that extra step. So there's a lot, again, the education is also very valuable, but I think it did stand out from a pedigree perspective on the resume.
I think Chris is right. It depends on what you want. I think, certainly in my experience is, in our business is, data analytics, data science, but human interaction still is very important for selling anything, in terms of getting commitment from your teams internally or from changing behaviors of our clients. So all of the human elements of an MBA or other programs should be given appropriate attention, because ultimately that is how a lot of major change happens. And Chris and Eric have both talked about it within their organizations, within their customer organizations. Is that's just a key piece to everything in creating culture as well as creating change and driving growth. Really is around the human piece of all of this.
Trying to unmute here, my apologies. In terms of the Weatherhead MBA, and I've had a lot of back and forth, throughout my career on this, in part because I ended up as an executive recruiter. So I'm looking at resumes and evaluating talent. But also, as I came out of the MBA program, I was, knock wood, fortunate enough to work for McKinsey. And McKinsey had not targeted Weatherhead or Case as a primary recruiting location. and that priority has changed and hopefully evolved for the better over the past 15, 20 years. But it wasn't a priority school, when I was coming through. And, I was fortunate enough to join up with the firm. And I actually had a classmate, Eric Rogner, who also joined the firm concurrent with me. So that was a big deal at the time. In looking at Weatherhead, I think as a younger alum and talking to potential Weatherhead attendees, the questions that we tended to put forth were, what do you expect from an MBA program? And I think Chris had alluded to this. There is clearly a regional component to it. If you're going to be in Northeastern Ohio, Weatherhead case has a certain level of cachet that definitely resonates throughout the corporate culture throughout the area. If you start speaking about it more nationally, then there are some trade-offs. And if your expectation of an MBA program is for you to show up and the brand name alone carries you off to opportunities, then you might have to reevaluate what you want to get out of your experience at Weatherhead. Weatherhead was a place where you had to hustle, where you really had to go after opportunities, and it wasn't always resident within Northeastern Ohio, for those avenues, for those pathways. We were, I'm thinking about my cohort, my class, and we were very creative in terms of getting out to other locations, officially or unofficially, in terms of looking for opportunities and making sure that, we took the Weatherhead brand with us. But what we knew succinctly, and we shared with prospective students, that showing up is not the victory lap here. You have to show up and you have to do work. And from an academic standpoint, you're going to have a tremendous exposure to world-class instruction, but there's a hustle component to it as well, Emily.
Eric, you laid a good foundation. We had 5 go to McKinsey in our class 6 years later.
Fantastic, yeah.
Wow, and thanks, Emily, for your question. It looks like we have another question from Paul. Paul, would you mind introducing yourself and asking your question?
Sure. Paul Stupe, company is Grow Logic, based here in Cleveland, and classmate of Eric, so nice to see Eric. But my question is, Chris, you kind of alluded to this with regard to the different industries, that are affected. I myself, have seen my clients' stock prices. Some of them are at their all-time high and some are at their all-time low. So it sort of raises that question. Do you shy away from either industries or companies that are going through one aspect of a particular cycle, or do you push your teams to sort of stay focused on everyone, not knowing what the 2021 looks like, and you don't want to miss that rebound?
I think for us, because of what we do, if a company is going to be in business, they kind of need us. And we always have leverage. If we stop providing service, that's a really difficult situation for someone to be in. They can't, in our industry, you call it running naked. You can't run naked on mission critical data center gear. And that means they do it themselves. That's a hard thing to do. So because of that, our people, there is nobody we've shied away from unless they are difficult. If somebody is asking you to make allowances or when they're difficult, you may not do business with them. That's very infrequent for us. So we've kind of been supporting everybody. Again, we this year, Delta's a new big customer. Delta Airlines is an example. We grew our Marriott business quite a bit. Just in general in retail, we have 17,500 customers. So we've got in that portfolio exposure. I've seen very little in the way of bankruptcies. A couple of the big retailers, I'm drawing a blank now, but names you would know. A couple of them had restructuring bankruptcies where, we did lose some of our receivables, but no, I wouldn't say that we've been shying away. We also pay our salespeople 100% variably. So it's hard to tell them don't sell. That doesn't compute with salespeople. So, you kind of got to work with them. And then globally, I don't think we've seen anything. I think in your question, you were also asking maybe if there's anything globally. I haven't seen anything in other parts of the world either. It kind of seems to be human beings seem to be very consistent globally. They're all kind of doing the same stuff in their own parts of the world to survive through this. And the same industries seem to be hurt in the same parts of the world, in my experience so far.
Yeah, I think it just depends, depending on the industry. Chris's services do seem more pervasive and a little bit more recession-proof, so to speak. I think depending on the industry, the nature of the conversation can change because you don't want to appear tone deaf. You may be able to serve them in a different way or under a different structure, or they may be so internally focused that it's just not the right time, and you want to avoid pushing something up a hill that doesn't have the right timing. Especially in our business, again, as we're working predominantly with private equity sponsored businesses, that if they're working on so many initiatives, if this is not the right time to talk to us, then we should be mindful and see if there's an alternate solution. And if there's not, then we should take a step back and find the right time. But I think it was Chris alluded to, is we've also found that we've made a lot of friends for life from how we've worked with clients over the course of the last 8 months, in both changing some of the terms and conditions because we have a very strong balance sheet and can do that. But we've also pivoted where, hey, having a conversation with a customer about pricing may not be right, but we may be able to help them with inventory or with their own cash collections. But that profitability was not as important earlier this year as cash collection was. And so pivoting that conversation, being a little bit gritty and creative is, I think, goes a very long way, especially in this environment.
Just a quick take on that. A lot of, and I think, Andy and Chris allude to this informally. We work across a wide spectrum of industries, and I don't know that we had the leisure of sitting there or being able to arbitrarily say we're going to spend more time or index heavier into one side or the other. What I did find is that we became a backdoor conduit of information for our clients. So we were constantly being asked, from clients in different geographies, in different industries, hey, Eric, what are they doing? Are they interviewing all the way to hire remotely, or are they having people on premise, or is it a blend? And the range of answers on that, you end up being, of console or consigliere to your clients about, hey, here are the trade-offs, and here's what we're seeing. And some companies, because of their jurisdiction, their geography, their industry, have this approach, and it's not necessarily right or wrong, but there are trade-offs to that approach. And just being an additional data point for the clients, I think, has been something that we've learned a lot from, and create a level of intimacy and trust with a lot of them throughout this endeavor.
Great, thanks for all answering that. Thanks, Paul, for the question. Professor Goldberg, you said you had.
Sure, I'll ask a quick question. I guess nothing's quick in these things because there's always interesting opportunities to explore. Chris, I wanted to riff off something that you mentioned in terms of, as you think about hiring and building teams, and perhaps how going forward, you put a premium on having folks with you here in Cleveland, although you have folks that aren't here. But, I guess as we think about the impact of the pandemic and how things may change for us going forward, are you going to think about remote work differently and building teams differently, potentially coming out of this, given how you've been able to work or where challenges have been with teams?
Well, unfortunately, if I want to hire people like Marissa, I probably have to consider that. Everybody has their opinion. Mine is, after managing people for a long time, now particularly large groups, when you have a good culture and everybody's in it and they're at work and they're working together, they just are more effective at solving problems, at having pride in what they do, at working together, collaborating, which is key. I don't think collaboration is all that effective remotely. And what I mean by that, the tools are great. You can get a hold of people, you click on it, their image pops up, but it's when you have disagreements that it doesn't work so well, in my opinion. What they do is they click off of who they're talking to and they click on someone else and start complaining, as opposed to sitting in a room and figuring it out. Because that's human beings. You have to do that. That's what makes us better. When you get to the other side of that, That's where you get real success and collaboration, in my opinion. And so that's why I always push people to be together. Even things like hallway talk. People walk down the hall, whether it's, whatever show they're watching. I guess The Crown's big now, and just building relationships. Or there's a problem and they happen to remember it as they cross paths with somebody and talk and solve it, or they walk down the hall and get the other person. Now, I know I'm old fashioned saying that, old school, and every other aspect of our business, I think, would be pretty hip. But in that regard, I've lost good talent because of it. But everybody, it's my choice at the end of the day. I have to make the choice I think is the best for the company. And the trade-off to me is the cultural impact of having a massive remote workforce isn't worth the trade-off of what I lose for it. Now, I'm going to pivot a little though to say it's going to be really hard for me to come back after, putting everybody remote globally. And I would say of our workforce, half to 2/3 is in offices, and then say, nope, you have to be back to work 5 days a week, full time. So I think I'm going to have to compromise here and come up with something that will allow people to have some level of remote work, because the world's changing. And, if you don't learn to change with it, someone else you'll be talking to some other person a year from now when you do the follow up to this meeting. So that's my take. I won't love it, but I think I'm going to have to compromise and work something out. So again, see, like if you notice, Marissa shook her head when I said that, because I think people like in that generation are thinking that's something that's important to us. So you got to adapt, and you have to listen to your constituency there. So that's my reluctant answer. I guess I'm probably going to have to give a little here and work something out with the people.
Chris, I would let me jump in momentarily here. Even at the junior level, but definitely as you get higher up in your organization, 9 times out of 10, when things don't work out, it's not because of technical capabilities or functional capabilities. It's usually a cultural issue when you have to let someone go or take a different path. And all of those inputs into, is the culture right, is the fit right, there's good reason why this is of concern to you at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that even pre-pandemic, we've been negotiating this topic, and historically we've had Chris's point of view that our work is highly collaborative, whether it's internal or with clients. So on-premise is the bias. I think the toothpaste is a little bit out of the tube with the pandemic and people working remotely. And we've had some folks, especially folks who live in metropolitan areas like downtown Chicago, and they're living there, but they don't get the benefit of it. So they've said, hey, I'm going to go move to Nashville, Tennessee, or I'm going to move to Tampa. And we've had a couple of those. And I think there's going to be more of that. I see a crystal ball of how it ultimately changes longer term, but there's certainly going to be some of that. And I think that's going to be okay, but we're still going to have people coming into the office, even if they're living in Nashville for periods of time. It also will diversify our talent pool. We are heavily indexed to Cleveland. We opened a Chicago office about 7 years ago for talent reasons, and it's served us well. But as we now have someone in Denver, we've got someone in Nashville, we've got a couple folks in Boston, and pre-pandemic, they were coming into Cleveland, and I think that'll continue. But I think that we've got to figure out the balance of being in office all the time and being remote, so that we still get the culture and we still get the productivity of collaboration, which technology helps, but it's definitely not the same.
And I can give you, so that's here, this is this cultural thing, but now I've got a lot of people in London, and a lot of those people are the same constituency of millennials. They want to go in the office. They don't want to work from home. In London, you get a postage stamp for an apartment. So if you're in quarantine, that's not fun. They want to be out. That city is meant to be enjoyed outside your apartment, not in your apartment. So, culture matters. Singapore is the same way. Matter of fact, Singapore has never really closed down. We've got location there. They've never really closed down, and they're a very densely populated city. They've got some protocols there. But I think it also matters where you are in the world. And, just in general, given this is a a lot of business students, I would tell you, culture is so important when you build and run a business. If people come to work because they have to, you'll never be as successful as if they come to work because they want to. And finding ways to do that, Heidi was talking about the Christmas party and that kind of thing. I always pay attention to those things because it matters to people. It's not all about growing the top line. It's about doing little things that are empathetic, thoughtful, compassionate. That lasts, making sure you just say thank you all the time to people. And by the way, Heidi, we this year aren't doing Christmas parties. What we're going to do is donate to food shelters, because we just thought the messaging this year, instead of spending money on that kind of thing, we were going to send drink tickets around the world and let everybody have a social hour, a drink hour. But we elected to donate to food shelters around the world instead. So I think you asked that question earlier.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Because I thought it would be a better message. But just as if you're learning, culture is so critical to being successful at business. People work better. You can be the highest payer out there, but if you never say thank you, you'll never get the best out of people. But if you just make them feel good, if you notice that little thing they did, you write a handwritten note, to somebody who didn't even realize that you knew they were an employee, the results you get are massive. So, on this topic, I think it's more of a cultural discussion in general, but whether it's, a lot of the things you guys have brought up today are around culture. Diversity and inclusion is around culture. How you handle the pandemic, is around culture. How you handle a Christmas party is all that's about culture. How you manage a career, that's, NPS scores internally, that's all about culture, all of it. It's about making people, because everybody's an individual, making sure that you recognize them, not just as part of the population, but as individuals, because they're going to work a lot harder, when you do that. So sorry to get on a bad wagon on that, but if you're a young MBA student, that's something that they don't teach you in school, but it is critical, particularly if you want to be a good leader.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's along the organizational behavior, whatever you want to call it, is you kind of sleep through some of those classes. You don't realize that culture really is important, and how you do make employees feel, and that everyone's going to work hard, but it's a lot more fun, and you'll get more out of people if they enjoy the journey as well. So to the extent that you can do that, it takes time and thought and energy to do that. But I think the great organizations do make that kind of time, and leadership teams have those conversations about the handwritten notes that Chris described. That, this year, that's what we're sending out to our employees is handwritten notes from the leadership team member that you work with. So just to be as mindful as you can, especially in times like this, because there is so much white space in relationships where it used to be in the hallway, it used to be in meetings, now it's in Zoom, so you don't know what's around someone, and you have to fill that with communication.
Well, this we only have a few more minutes left. And again, just thank you to all three of you for participating, and just for everyone for answering questions. And my last question was just, what advice do you have for college students or young college graduates who may be starting their careers, in a challenging or all virtual environment? And you guys were kind of already talking about that, but do you have any final thoughts that you would like to give?
Eric, you're probably the best one to start.
Well, again, for recent grads or young alums, and again, the COVID skews a lot of the decision making and perhaps some of the options that are available. But in looking back, you should be unafraid to go anywhere early in your career. I think a lot of folks, in their 20s, for instance, over-index to large cities. I want to be in New York. I want to be in Chicago. I want to be in Atlanta. And you look around and see the people who over time are often quite successful. They've developed a resilience of not necessarily being in the sexiest city at the sexiest time, and learn how to work through that. I think the folks that you meet from GE historically are a wonderful representation of that. GE had so many facilities in a lot of backwater locations, and people ended up thinking they got the short straw because they had to go out to somewhere in Iowa for a 3-year stint. But that experience, they relied upon you to do everything. You learned so much, so that when you did come back to a larger city, back to corporate, it was very transferable to project leadership capabilities and effectiveness as a manager.
Yeah, one thing I would just say, especially in the current environment, is that I think people have become much more human. And as I think it was Eric talked about, the hearing a dog barking in the background or kids coming and asking questions during a conference call are no longer taboo. I think similarly, people, especially executives, are more accessible. And as a young new hire, I would be respectful, but be aggressive about getting on people's calendars and meeting people in Zoom meetings, or if you get back into the office, to create those relationships, because I think people are more accessible than they have been historically, and that will go a long way into creating a foundation for you within whatever organization you land, and will treat you well both in your early days as well as the kind of relationships that will be your network longer term.
I think the only thing I could add again is, given where you are in your career and having run a business and hired thousands of people probably at this point, that the world is very unfair. No one's going to owe you anything, and all you can do to get ahead is work harder than the next person. So that goes back to where do you want to go? As I tell people all the time, it's not for me to decide what people want or what's a successful career. I have people who just want to be able to get home, have a good job, and then coach their kids.
We may have lost Chris. Well, let me jump in as we sort of wrap up. Marissa, let me thank you for moderating the panel. And Andy, Chris, and Eric, it's great conversation. I know we'd all rather be together at Weatherhead 100 in our black tie, celebrating the winners this year, but because 2020 and 2021 are what they are, this will have to suffice. But we do look forward to getting back together. Oh, do we lose Chris altogether? Okay. So Chris Sr., thank Chris for joining. And sorry we didn't get to your question. I did post a little bit more information on the Weatherhead 100 in the for those that are interested in the chat. I also posted a link to some upcoming events that we have at the Veale Institute. We have a few this week, and then in 2021, we'll be back to offering a number of other programs. So with that, happy holidays to everybody. Andy, Eric, and Chris, thanks for participating. Marissa, great job moderating, and look forward to seeing everybody soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you very much.
Take
Take
care.
care.